ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to True Set Free. My name is Matt Lewis. I'm here with Steve Whinery. He's the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel Tri-Cities. And this is a question and answer show that we do. And so if you have questions for Pastor Steve, you can email crosswalkradio@gmail.com. You can also voicemail or text message 707-872-7677. Most of you guys work at this time, and so you send me questions that way. But if you're watching live, Facebook or YouTube, feel free to post in the comments. Michael's over there monitoring that, and we'll get to you as best we can. You can also put in prayer requests if you want us to pray for you. We would love to do that. And then like, subscribe, share this platform. I would really appreciate that. We're trying to get this out. We also have a podcast that is separate from Q&A that is a deep dive on theological topics, and we spend literally hours going through issues in more of a structured, formal way than just doing a question at a time. And so that is True Set Free Uncut, Unpacking Theology. And so look for that too. We have a separate channel on YouTube for the podcast. Last thing, if you guys are local and you're looking for a church, we would love to have you. We have an 8:30 and 10:30 Sunday morning service. Then we have a Wednesday 6:30, which is tonight. Steve just started the book of Jeremiah. This is session 2, I believe.
Yes, I did. Yep.
And so it's a good time to come and jump into a new book. And then we have Sunday night at 6 o'clock as well. So most of our stuff's online, but if you want fellowship, if you're looking for a church, we'd love to have you come down. Anything you want to say?
No.
Okay. Let's jump into some questions here. This is my first one for today, Pastor Steve. So this is something that's going on the internet. And then we have crazy people come and question or call and ask stuff. And so here's one of them. It says, well, let me go back to the main thing here. So, did Israel kill Charlie Kirk? Was Jack Hibbs and Amir Safari in on it? Are Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson right? So on and so forth. And so we were talking a little bit beforehand, but it's conspiracy theory central regarding the issue of Charlie Kirk on the internet. And you have Christians who are falling victim and do not, for whatever reason, they do not have any wisdom here, and they're being deceived and jumping on the bandwagon to these conspiracy theories that are just clearly false. So there's a question. You take it from there.
Charlie Kirk was obviously a supporter of Israel in the sense that we've talked about before. I don't think that he was a guy who necessarily supported everything that Israel does, as I am not somebody who supports everything that Israel does, because when you're talking about Israel, you're talking about a bunch of people who don't know Jesus. It's like I'm a supporter of the United States. I am not a supporter of everything the United States does, especially under Democrat leadership, because we do a bunch of stuff that's out to lunch. It's one of the reasons that when I'm doing my taxes, I get every penny back. I don't pay one extra penny to the government because I don't like what they do with it, what they do with the money. And so same thing, but Charlie Kirk was outspoken supporter of the Jewish people. And so I don't see a reason that Israel would kill Charlie Kirk. That would be a kind of a stupid thing. I did look up the situation with Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson. And Tucker Carlson is being accused of anti-Semitism. I couldn't find one anti-Semitic statement that the guy's made. He has made statements again about the nation of Israel and unqualified support for Israeli policies, and I don't have a problem with that. That just makes, like I said, all kinds of sense. But that doesn't mean that he's anti-Semitic. And the latest thing that they were calling anti-Semitic is his eulogy at the Charlie Kirk
Memorial.
Yeah. And I when I saw that, I was like, what are we talking about? Because I watched it. And then I went on and I looked at it again, and then you can listen to it for yourself. In the first couple of minutes, he compares Charlie Kirk to Jesus, and there's a reason for that in the Bible. Jesus said, "If they hated me, they're going to hate you. If they kill me, what do you think they're going to do to you?" And so, Charlie Kirk was killed for being an outspoken Christian, and that is the reason. And so you can see why Tucker would go there. And I'm not even trying to be an apologist for the guy. It's just that that's why he would go there. And when he was talking about the Jewish leaders who wanted to kill Jesus. And that is historically what happened. Jewish leaders wanted to kill Jesus. And he wasn't comparing the people who killed, the person who killed Tucker to Israel.
Killed Charlie.
Or the basically the people who killed Tucker to Israel. That's not what he was talking about. What he was talking about was leftists. And so he's talking about leftists wanted Charlie Kirk dead, Charlie Kirk dead. And so it was leftists that killed him. And so he compared the leftists to the guys who killed Jesus. That's pretty straightforward. And it doesn't have anything to do with the modern nation of Israel. And so that's just a bunch of nonsense. Jack Hibbs, give me a break. Amir Sephardi, that's just crazy talk. And so here's the thing, once again, about the internet. Don't believe everything that you read on the internet. It's like whenever somebody makes a statement about somebody. Now, Candace Owens, she said some goofy stuff. And, actually I'm praying for that lady because there's something going on with her. I don't know what her deal is, but there's something going on with her. In any case, when you hear this kind of nonsense, go and look at original sources and stop listening to all the babble that you see on the internet. Most of these people are just looking for clickbait in the first place, and so whether you're talking about news organizations or whether you're talking about people who are doing podcasts or whatever, that's what they're looking for. And so stop falling for it. I don't know. You got to be able to go through and filter information. And so this is something that I've been used to for since high school. It's like you're looking up information for term papers and reports and things like that, and you can get good sources and you can get bad sources, and you need to have good sources so that you reasonably know what you're talking about. And so this is nothing but nonsense, and people need to stop it. I think it's spiritually motivated, though. I think Satan hates Jews because God loves them.
Yeah,
and so he wants to trash them. Some of the stuff that goes on in these situations, specifically with the articles that I saw about Tucker. And I don't agree with everything Tucker says. I think Tucker's stance on supersessionism is dumb. I don't think he knows his doctrine, and I don't even know if he's going along with his church on those issues. In any case, when I look at the things that were being stated about Tucker, I went and looked at original sources and the things that Tucker actually said, and it's just lies. It's slander. And so Christians shouldn't be involved in people who are slandering other people. And that's one of the problems that we have with our world today, and specifically when you're talking about news broadcasts and things like that. A lot of the stuff that you see on the news is nothing but a bunch of gossip. And so they put it on there so they can get viewers because people like gossip. So I don't like that. When I see the gossip, I just click it and move on. So
you mentioned the fact that God has a chosen people, Israel. Satan doesn't like that. He's going to go after him. We know, excuse me, the end of the book is revolved around the persecution of the Jews.
Right.
Whole tribulation period. And when you have this whole rise in conspiracy theory, we went through the vid and all these things that the conspiracies ended up being true. And it's like you have this group of believers that it's like they have no discernment. They have no wisdom on navigating, okay, that one was true. it doesn't mean that they're all true.
Right.
And so you can't jump on the bandwagon on everything, especially the ones that are out in left field. Now, I agree with your assessment of Tucker.
Let me just be, hilarious here. If it's about Democrats, it's probably true. This guy's just been lying for so long, man. It's just like, I don't believe everything a Republican says either, but, and I constantly check things out. But, if it's coming from a left-leaning source, I automatically question it. Automatically.
Yeah.
And I want to know, 3 articles deep what's being spoken about here, because of the obvious propaganda that goes out. Sorry for all you Democrats. I don't vote better people into leadership. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. So on that note, one of the reasons you have the undiscerning minds is because they don't know their Bible. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of this started with Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson interview.
All right.
We recently had Nick Fuentes on, and he made a comment where he said, and this is Tucker not understanding what the Bible says and saying things like the people he despises most in this world are Christian Zionists.
Yeah.
And the reason he says that is because someone came on his show and told him this whole thing about the Schofield Bible and how about the replacement theology is the correct view, and anyone who doesn't think that the church is Israel is heretical.
Yeah.
That's
old Catholic doctrine.
Yeah.
Old Catholic doctrine.
Right.
It's actually, they've changed it. So,
yeah.
It's like.
So he doesn't know.
Whatever.
And he says these dumb things.
Yeah.
And then because he has a huge platform. Right. One of the biggest right now.
Yeah.
Then people come on and they do all the comments and the conspiracy theories and the clickbaits. And here's the sad thing. I know the world's going to do that, right? It's free for all in the world. But people in the church, Christians, are becoming victim to the nonsense.
Yeah.
Stop.
Right. Winds of doctrine.
Yeah.
We're not to be swayed by winds of doctrine, it says in Ephesians chapter 4. And so you need to know what your Bible says, and you need to be paying attention to that and not get off on all these things.
Okay.
So,
anything else on that question?
I think it's all crazy. So
don't be cray-cray.
Don't be cray-cray. Not a good thing.
All right, moving on. This is from Jenny. She's writing in a question regarding Jezebel, and she says, what is the significance of the head and the hands? And regarding Jezebel, she says only her head and her hands were left after the dogs ate her, referring to Old Testament passage. And then Dagon, which is another character in this, the hands and the head were removed, only the abdomen was left.
Right.
And then she says, maybe at some point can talk about the fact that Dagon was a mermaid, historical depictions of like King Triton, it reminds her of Genesis 6 with the giants and all that. And so, yeah, that's her question. Is there a significance to that with both of those in some type of parallelism in Scripture?
Yeah, well, let me read the passage. This is out of 2 Kings chapter 9. And what's happening is Jehu is taking over in fulfillment of prophecy. And he comes to the palace, and Jezebel is there. And it says he looked up at the window where Jezebel came out and said, who's on my side? Who? So 2 of the 3 eunuchs looked out at him. Then he said, throw her down. So they threw her down, and some of her blood splattered on the wall and on the horses, and he trampled her underfoot. And when he had gone in, he ate and drank. Then he said, go now, see to this accursed woman, and bury her, for she was a king's daughter. So they went to bury her, but they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. Therefore they came back and told him, and he said, this is the word of the Lord which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite, saying, on the plot of ground at Jezreel dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel. And the corpse of Jezebel shall be as refuse on the surface of the field in the plot at Jezreel, so that they shall not say, here lies Jezebel. Is there significance? The Bible doesn't flat out state it, but when you go through and you look at other passages that speak about the hands are usually connected with works, doing things. whether good or bad. And feet are all about a walk and walking in a righteous path or in an unrighteous path. And the head obviously is the seat of the intellect. It's the seat of the intellect. It's the seat of the will. It's the seat of your soul. That kind of stuff. And so, yeah, there can be symbolism to that. And so this lady was absolutely wicked, and her will was bent against the God of the Bible and bent towards a frankly brutal and barbaric religion as far as Baal worship goes. They just butchered children. And obviously her hands were involved in wicked works. She killed the prophets of God, and obviously that reflects a walk that was anti-God. And so, yeah, that would be the significance. You got some of the same things actually with the Dagon thing. It's a little bit different. The word Dagon itself means fish. And so the Philistines were worshiping a fish. And so the story goes, and this is in the book of 1 Samuel. The story goes that the Philistines capture the Ark of the Covenant, and they take it, and they place the Ark of the Covenant before the idol Dagon. And when they come in the next night, the idol is knocked over. And so, the whole picture there is poor Dagon, he can't pick himself up. So the priests have to come in and pick him up. And then the next time that they walk in, his hands and his hands and his head are cut off. And all that's left is the torso. And Dagon was actually a merman, not a mermaid. He was a merman. And so God's like, you worship a fish, I'm going to make Dagon a fish. And so it's just hilarious. It shows the attitude of God and the fact that he's a pretty funny guy. And so when you're looking at that passage, it's one of my favorite passages in the Bible. It's like, you want to worship a fish, then worship a fish. Don't put a man's head on it. So
God always has a sense of humor. It's funny. All right, good on that?
Yep.
All right, moving on to Psalm 35. Trey has a question, and he says this. David asks the Lord for revenge against his enemies, while Stephen asks the Lord for mercy on his enemies. Which man was right?
David. I'm obviously joking. There's a number of psalms that are what are called imprecatory psalms, talking about the fact that the psalmist, whether David or some later psalmists, are asking the Lord for judgment against the wicked. When you look in the New Testament, obviously Stephen's a great example of New Testament example of forgiveness, and he did what Jesus did. Father, forgive them; they don't know what they're doing. And what Stephen said was, "Don't lay this charge against them." And so, in that, he was emulating Jesus. But one of the things that you got to remember is that, for example, Paul the Apostle in 2 Timothy said this: Alexander the coppersmith did me much harm. The Lord repay him according to his works. And so that's a prayer. And so you get to pray what you want. And it's one of the things about the Psalms that I really like. And again, one of the things that you have to remember about the Psalms is that when David or others are praying these things, for example, let's just read some of Psalm 35. Plead my cause, O Lord, with those who strive with me. Fight against those who fight against me. Take hold of shield and buckler and stand up for my help. Also draw out the spear and stop those who pursue me. Say to my soul, I am your salvation. Let those be put to shame and brought to dishonor who seek after my life. Let those be turned back and brought to confusion who plot my hurt. And what David is talking about is the fact that there were people who were out to kill him. And so he's asking for God's protection in that, and asking that God would be the one that would fight for him, instead of David having to fight for himself. And that's actually a valid prayer. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. I'm the one who's going to repay.
Yeah.
And I added some to that to emphasize it. I will repay is what the passage teaches in Romans chapter 12. And so totally valid to go to the Lord and ask for protection, totally valid to ask the Lord to step in a situation like this. And God gets to do what he wants. And so my attitude towards prayer is that I want to have the heart of Jesus. But again, when you're thinking about the heart of Jesus, Jesus gave the Jews at the time warnings about retribution that was coming from God. And so there's, for example, a parable where he talks about a vineyard, and the vineyard's been leased out and they won't give the fruit. And so the vineyard owner sends a couple of servants, and the servants get beaten up and things like that. And then finally they send the son, and the son comes and they kill him. And in some of the, and there's a number of these parables that Jesus spoke, and in one of them specifically, he says, "But bring those people who didn't want me to rule over them, and slay them before me." And so, that's Jesus talking to the nation of Israel and all those who are in rebellion against God, and saying there's judgment that's going to be coming. And so, when I'm thinking about Jesus, a lot of times we have this like Sunday school picture of Jesus where it's gentle Jesus, meek and mild, and he's always saying nice things. I think that specifically when he was on the cross, he was, when he said, "Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing." I think that's a situation where he understands they don't realize the import of what's taken place right there. And some people even think that he's talking about the Roman soldiers in that case. They don't know what they're doing. And so at that point, Jesus says, don't lay this sin to their charge. But when you look at how he speaks to for example, to the Jewish leadership in Matthew chapter 23, he just goes through and one woe after another. There's 8 woes pronounced in that passage against the Jewish leadership for their knowledgeable disobedience to God's word. And Jesus does not pull punches on these guys.
Right.
And so, there is context. So when Jesus comes back, he's coming back to take over the earth, and he is going to evict those who don't belong here. And that eviction is the judgment of God. And so again, when you're looking at all this stuff, again, I want to be a forgiving guy. I want to be a gracious guy, but at the same time, whether I'm in the Old Testament, I see lots of places where God is totally gracious and merciful, and in the New Testament, I see places where God is radically intense and going to judge. And in the Old Testament, I see places where God is radically intense and judges. And in the New Testament, I see places where God is radically gracious and gives people a break. And so God hasn't changed at all. And so, again, when you're looking at this, both these guys are right, And, yeah. And again, when I'm going through the Psalms, the cool thing about the Psalms is you can see that the psalmist gets to say anything he wants. He gets to pray anything that he wants. And then God straightens all that out and turns it around for him. Sometimes the psalmist will start off complaining at God and saying, "Where are you?" and what's going on. And by the time you get to the end of the psalm, God's already changed his heart and he's praising and glorifying God.
Yeah.
And so that's what prayer is about. We come to the Lord with what's on our heart. You need to, because that's all that God's hearing anyway.
Yeah.
So
not going to fake them out.
Yeah.
We can pray for people and love the person, but then hate what they're doing and pray against what they're doing.
Exactly.
You see the attitudes too, and Jesus is talking to people, the religious people, Some he has compassion on, some he totally blasts.
Right.
The attitude he has towards
His disciples.
yeah, some guys.
There are times he does that, yeah.
When they killed John the Baptist,
Oh, yeah.
you can tell Jesus is like, he doesn't appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, you go tell that female fox, he's got an attitude towards a guy.
Right.
He's Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
He still loves him. But when you're talking about cutting off the head of one of his friends,
Right.
there's going to be a little spice there.
Yeah, and Herod, when Jesus stood before Herod, Jesus didn't say a word to the guy.
Yeah.
That's an indication of how far gone that guy was,
Right.
and how accountable before God he was.
Yeah.
Yeah, he'd gotten Bible studies from John the Baptist, and
Right.
responded to them by having his head cut off because he didn't want to look bad in front of his friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
There you go.
nothing from Jesus after that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, moving right along here. Question from Nick. He says, I'm reading 1 Corinthians, and I was looking at the word sanctified, and he says, the act of being made holy or separated for or to God. The Greek indicates that the tense of that word is perfect tense, which tells me it's a done deal, and it remains a done deal. This is the question. Does that mean that sanctification is unconditional? Is there a part of the morphology that indicates when a term is conditional or unconditional?
When you're talking about Greek grammar, Greek is really cool because it's way more specific than, for example, Hebrew. Hebrew's kind of vague, and you get a lot of things from context, even with Hebrew nouns. When you're talking about Greek, Greek has more specificity, and so that's very cool. But you don't want to take it too far, and so when you're talking about the perfect tense, and that makes it a done deal, and it remains a done deal. That is not actually the case for the perfect tense. Perfect tense is talking about a past action that has present consequences. And so it is ongoing, past action that has present ongoing consequences. And a lot of guys have jumped on that and said that that's a done deal, and that means that nothing can change it or whatever. But when you look at that, when somebody says "I am ruined," that's in the perfect tense. And so when you're looking at that phraseology, we all know what that means. And if you're talking about in a financial sense, that means I'm bankrupt, and it's talking about the fact that there are past actions that have present consequences, and the present consequences are I am ruined. That doesn't mean that you don't have the ability to go out and work and change your financial situation. And we would never think that. For example, in English, if a guy said, I am ruined, we would never think that this guy's got no hope of ever getting a job and getting out of his situation.
Right.
Yeah. We'd just go, okay, poor guy, he's bankrupt. He's going to have to do some stuff to get his life back together. Or you could say that in any area of life. I lost my marriage. I'm ruined. Well, that doesn't mean that you can't get your marriage back. That doesn't mean that you can't that you're never going to be married again and it's all over for you. And so again, when you're talking about perfect tense in Greek, it's just like perfect tense in English. And so you don't want to put more into it than that. And so what Jesus did in chapter 1 with sanctifying us, obviously that's something we've been set apart by Christ because of what he did on the cross, and the fact that if we receive Jesus, all of that stuff goes together with it. And so yeah, I'm set apart by God, and that there's a past action that took place, whether we're talking about what Jesus did on the cross, or whether we're talking about my reception of Jesus' sacrifice for me. Either one of those things is going to have, it's a past action that's going to have present circumstances, and those circumstances will be ongoing. Doesn't mean that I can't, that's it. And so all I'm saying is don't put more into the grammar than the grammar allows. And this whole thing with the perfect tense is an example of that. So you got to watch out for that.
Yeah, good.
Context is what matters in a situation like that.
All right, George is on YouTube. Pastor Steve, he quotes this phrase, "Behold, peace and safety, then sudden destruction." He says, "Are we near 1 Thessalonians concerning Christ's return?"
There are a number of things that the Bible teaches about the last days that are indicators that we are actually in the last days and very close to it. And so you could go to a number of passages. There's a passage in 1 Timothy chapter 3, for example, that talks about the attitudes. Oh no, I did that wrong. 2 Timothy chapter 3, talk about the attitudes of people. I like this a lot. It says, "But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves." And whenever I go through this with my people, I go, "Is that happening?" And the answer is yes. "Lovers of money," is that happening? "Boasters," that happening? "Proud," "blasphemers," "disobedient to parents," "unthankful," "unholy," "unloving," "unforgiving," "slanderers," "without self-control," "brutal," "despisers of good," "traitors," "headstrong," "haughty," "lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God." And all of those things have been happening down through the ages, but not culture-wide. Not culture-wide. And this is on a global scale that you have this kind of attitude with people. And it's an indication of the last days. When you're talking about peace and safety, that is from a passage out of 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. In verse 3 it says, "When they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape." There is, in the Old Testament, in Ezekiel chapter 37 through 39, a scenario where Israel comes back together as a nation. They aren't separated into two countries anymore, northern and southern. They are one nation, and it's after a long period of absence from the land of Israel. And after they get back into the land, they're attacked by a coalition of mostly nowadays Muslim nations, along with Russia. And it's in that situation, in that attack, that God shows himself strong on behalf of Israel, and they begin to turn, and the Holy Spirit begins to be poured out on them. And that looks like that's at the beginning of the tribulation period. Well, when you look at the names of the nations, all those nations happen to be aligned with Russia at this point. All the nations that we know for sure in that passage are aligned with Russia at this point, and they are all anti-Israel. And so that's very interesting. Another marker. And then we have the whole situation with President Trump. One peace deal after another. What is it like? It's like 7 or 8 now.
Yeah.
Different times that he's gone out and he's put peace together with intractable enemies. And so India and Pakistan, for example, that could have been nuclear very easily. And again, you go through and look at the things that he's done, and I don't think that is something that's necessarily. I don't want to make it a situation that I think is wicked or awful or something like that, because obviously we're Christians and we want people to live in peace. But one of the signs of the times is that there's going to be general peace. And that's the point of that passage. It looks like everything's going well, everything's going fine, and as far as the world is concerned, it's peace and safety. And then you have this sudden destruction that comes upon the world, and that's the beginning of the tribulation period. And so, I think we're in the last days, and there's a number of markers that we could go through and talk about that indicates that. But yeah, I think so.
When you're just curious on that timeline, would you put that phrase when the Antichrist resolves a peace deal after World War III, right before the tribulation, or would you put it before that, pre-rapture, where there's this build up to peace into all of a sudden a red button gets pushed type of thing.
Well, what you have in chapter 4 is the rapture, and then immediately after you have this whole thing with peace and safety. And the rapture is connected with that.
Right.
And so they say peace and safety, destruction comes upon them, but it doesn't come upon us because we're not appointed for the wrath of God.
Right.
And so right after the description of the rapture. And so I would put that in connection with the times where the rapture of the church is taking place. Specifically in this passage, it talks about the day of the Lord overtaking you. And the day of the Lord starts effectively at the rapture of the church. And so it's not the rapture of the church. The day of the Lord is God intervening in human history, and specifically it includes the tribulation period and the millennial period. Mm-hmm. And so 1,007 years at least. And that starts off with a bang. It starts off with the taking away of the church, and then the sudden destruction that you just described as World War III. That's what we would describe it as we look at the Bible. And it looks like the Antichrist rises out of that, brings peace at that point. And so I would put it before the tribulation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Elizabeth is on YouTube. She asks if your Jeremiah study is online. And so, Elizabeth, our Wednesday night follows a week behind online. And so the first one, which was last week, if that makes sense, will stream tonight. And then the one Steve's doing tonight here at Calvary will stream next week, so on and so forth. So you're correct. Jeremiah will be live tonight on our Facebook and YouTube, Mike. Yep, both platforms. All right, this was actually from, I think, last week on YouTube that I missed here, Steve, and it was from Tyler. And he says, is Revelation meant to be taken literally?
Everything in the Bible is meant to be taken literally, and this is what I mean by that. When you're looking at what Scripture has to say, for example, I was going through and I'm studying in Jeremiah, and I think it's in Jeremiah chapter 4, might be chapter 3, but it talks about armies coming down from the north going to take out Israel, and it says that I'm going to bring a lion from the north. And that is a metaphor. And as a matter of fact, later on in the book of Daniel, the kingdom of Babylon is pictured as a lion with wings. And so it's a reference to the Babylonians coming down against Israel. It's a metaphorical use of a lion to show the ravenous and abrupt attack that's going to take place against the nation I said Israel, but it's talking about the nation of Judah specifically. And so if you're going to interpret that, you have to interpret that literally, and it's literally a metaphor. So you don't get to make a metaphor literal if there's obviously a metaphor being used in the passage. Okay, and so it's the same thing with the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation uses symbolism. It's Jewish symbolism out of the Old Testament. There are at least Chuck Missler always stated this, and I went through and counted them. There are at least 404 references or allusions to the Old Testament in the book of Revelation, and so when you're looking at things like in Revelation chapter 5, it talks about the appearance of Jesus. There's a whole scenario where there's a scroll in heaven that's been brought out, and there's a strong angel that says, is anybody able to open the scroll? And John says that there was nobody able to open the scroll or even to look at it. And then it goes, then he begins weeping, and one of the elders in the passage, it's another personage, comes to him and says, you don't need to weep. The Lion of the tribe of Judah, the son of David, is able to open the scroll. And then it says, and out from the throne came a lamb as though it had been slain. And we know what the symbolism is. And so it's symbolic and it's metaphorical, but it's talking about Jesus. And it's talking about the fact that Jesus was coming out from the throne, and that he still had the marks of his death on him. That's what a lamb that has been slain is talking about. It's also speaking to the fact that he was the sacrifice lamb, he was the redeemer, and the passage goes on and talks about that. And so I believe that when John was having the vision, that's the vision that he had. He saw Jesus coming out, and he describes that as a lamb as though it had been slain, and uses all that imagery. And again, that's metaphorical. And so you interpret that literally, which would mean it would have to be a metaphorical interpretation. But you don't come along and you say that, well, none of that ever happened, or something along those lines. And so again, when you're in the book of Revelation, lots of symbolism is going on at different times. But generally speaking, when I go through the book of Revelation, unless I have a really good reason not to take the text as a narrative as far as what it's saying, I think that what we're talking about is flat out what it says. And so the danger comes when you start trying to throw in symbolism that the text isn't trying to use. So you can tell, everybody can tell the difference. When we're in the book of Psalms, there's lots of symbolism that's used, or lots of metaphor that's used. And if you interpret that in a rigid, literal manner, you are violating the grammar. You are violating the intent of the author. And so when I say that God is like an ocean, in a song, for example, God's like an ocean, I don't think that God's a big ocean. And you should know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, you're a dummy. So don't do that. And again, you got the same thing. So let me give you specifics. There is symbolic language in Revelation chapter 6. It talks about a guy riding on a white horse, and he comes conquering in to conquer, and he's got a crown on his head, and he's got a bow. And all of those things are metaphors for military conquest. And so the reality is that there's a guy who's going to come along, and he's going to rise from military conquest. And so you can go in the Old Testament and see that that's exactly what happens with the Antichrist. And so another guy is riding on a red horse, and it flat out says that's warfare. And so it's interpreted for you. And so it's talking about warfare. And then, so on, all the way through the passage. And so you have the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And again, when I'm reading that, there are metaphors that are being used, and it's in a vision format, and it's in the format of there's a scroll, and coming a seal is opened, and then suddenly there is this picture. And I have no doubt that that's the picture that God gave to John. And so I take that seriously, but in most places these things are interpreted for you.
Yeah.
And so I think that in chapter 7, when it says there's a great multitude that no man could number that were coming out of the great tribulation, and they were seen in heaven, I think that's what we're talking about, a great number. When it says that there's 144,000 young Jewish men who are virgins, unmarried Jewish men, virgins, and 12,000 from each one of the tribes that are listed there, I think that it means young Jewish men who are virgins, 12,000 from each one of those tribes. And I don't try to make, symbolic numbers out of it and things like that. I think that God's too pedantic in that passage to leave it to that, and so on as you go through. So when I look at all the judgments that you have in the book of Revelation, I never try to make them something smaller than what they actually state. And this is something that you got to keep in mind when you're talking about symbolic language in the Bible. So, for example, the Bible compares hell to a lake of fire. I don't know if it's a lake of fire or not. I don't know if that's symbolism. I don't know if that's metaphor. I don't know if that's like an illustration to get something across to you. I don't know if there's a big lake someplace that's made out of fire. I do know that I don't want to go there, Because if it's symbolic at all, that means the reality is more intense than the symbolism. And so I always keep that in mind when I'm looking at those kinds of issues. And so, yeah.
So I taught through the book of Daniel, and it's not that I hadn't been through it before, but when you're teaching it, you tend to unravel some stuff so that you have actual clue of what you're talking about. It's like taking it to the next step. And when I went through there, I realized, like in Revelation 13, when it says, I saw a leopard, feet like a bear, a mouth like a lion, 10 horns, all this stuff, I'm like, oh, he's talking about Daniel.
Exactly.
And so a lot of times when people have this attitude towards it, I realized either A, they don't know their Bible, they don't know the Old Testament, or B, now that I understand more of an eschatological whole view, there's basically two interpretations. One of it is the grammatical, historical, literal, and that's going to define your pre-mill, an actual millennium, and those types of views. Or your post-mill, there is no millennium, and that means you have to allegorize everything.
Right.
And so the attitude of, well, you can make Revelation say that what you want. I never really understood where that come from until I realized it's like, oh, that's a majority view in eschatology.
Yeah.
So that's where all the tones are coming from.
Yeah.
But God didn't, it's the only book that says you get a special blessing for reading it.
Right.
I don't think he on a whim changed from every other book in Scripture and go, well, it's all just whatever you think it is, and
right.
This means that, and that means that, and whatever. It's like, well, Jesus talked about these things in a literal way.
Right.
So maybe John's vision of Jesus was meant to be understood in a literal way.
Well, if it's a book that can get a blessing if you read it, God obviously meant you to understand it.
Right.
And I think that part of the blessing is what I already mentioned, the fact that if you're really going to understand the book of Revelation, you're going to have to spend some time in the Old Testament. And so you're not really going to understand the book of Revelation unless you're reading Ezekiel and you're reading the book of Daniel at the very least. Zechariah is another one that the book of Revelation takes from liberally. And so you have all these references to Old Testament symbolisms and in the book of Revelation, and if you don't know your Old Testament, you're just going to be making things up if you're trying to interpret it. The Bible interprets the Bible, and so again, you have to be careful. Now, one of the things that can happen with people is they can go overboard on that. There's a passage in the book of Daniel that talks about a great stone rolling down off a hill and smashing into an idol. And the idol represents the nations, the Gentile nations of the earth. And the stone grows into a great mountain, and that's the kingdom of God that lasts forever. And it's talking about Jesus coming back and taking over, basically. And that's, again, in the book of Daniel. And so there are passages that talk about kingdoms being great mountains, right? And when you get to Revelation chapter 8, one of the things that interpreters did, the Bible talks about, something like a great mountain or something like a mountain falling from the heavens and hitting the sea. And so that can either be talking about something like a great mountain or a mountain falling from the heavens and hitting the sea, or it can be all symbolism, okay? And so how are you going to tell the difference? There's passages in the book of Revelation that talk about the sea being, tongues and peoples and kindreds. Okay. Then there are other passages that talk about the sea being the sea. So the sea becomes blood, and everything living in the sea dies. Okay. Well, that can't be talking about peoples and nations and kindreds, because not everything's going to be dead when Jesus comes back. So we're talking about the sea at that point. So how do you know what you're talking about in Revelation chapter 8? And one of the ways that you know that is because in the passage it says, and because of this destruction that comes down on the ocean, that a third of the ships are destroyed. And so, when you go through and you read commentaries, they're like, oh, this is a great kingdom that's been destroyed and falls to the earth. And, this kind of, and it's the Roman Empire. Guys go off with that. And they go, the sea is the peoples and the nations and and the tongues and the kindreds. And then they never say anything about the ships. and it's because it doesn't go along with the whole allegorical interpretation of that passage. And so I think that the sea, when it turns to blood, I think it's talking about the sea. And I think the sea in Revelation chapter 8, because they're ships, is probably talking about the sea. So it's not rocket science, but you do need to know your Old Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And pay attention when you're reading.
Yep. By the way, when you get to chapter 12, it's the book of Revelation specifically says that we are now talking symbolism. I saw a great sign in heaven, and so some of the most concentrated symbolism that you have in the book of Revelation is from chapter 12 all the way to chapter 14. Mm-hmm. And so you have to pay attention to what the book is saying itself. So, yeah.
Okay. Good on that.
Yep.
Next question's from Susie. She says, "Hi, Steve and Matt. These days, many evil acts are being defined as, quote, mental health issues. How does that coexist with our spiritual health? It feels like we're excusing sin and ignoring the fact of evil."
I agree with you.
100%.
100%, yeah. When you look at the whole mental health excuse for not having people pay consequences, I think you have to be really careful with that. The Bible's clear on the fact that if you kill somebody, if you shed man's blood, this is out of Genesis chapter 9, by man your blood shall be shed. God demands the death penalty for murder. And so when you're looking at people who are having mental health issues, one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that going around killing things or killing people is wickedness, whether the person isn't altogether there or not. It's wickedness. Why when we're looking at these things do we give an excuse for the evil that people do in a situation like that? Aren't we just as, and I'm speaking from the point of view of a secularist, why aren't people bent towards doing good in situations like that? And so you've got people who are mentally handicapped, and they can just as easily do good as well as evil from a secularist point of view. And in fact, there are people that are like that. And usually they're kids who've been raised in homes where people have loved them, and they're kind and they're sweet and they're nice. And, that's a product of pouring into a person's life. And so when you look at the bents that we do have bents towards evil. And you can see that in every part of culture. We were talking earlier about Erica Kirk. I think that was before the broadcast here. I went on YouTube to listen to her speech at Charlie Kirk's memorial. And one of the reasons I did that is because I remembered a phrase that I want to use in a Bible study that she stated. And so I'm sitting there listening to it, and then I'm looking at the comments down below it. I've never seen anything so vile ever. And I'm looking at all these things that people are saying and all the wickedness that's coming out of their mouths about that lady. And I'm just like, oh, wow. Every thought and intent of their heart was only evil continually.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, there's evil in this world. And so, again, when the Bible makes statements about how justice is supposed to go, obviously somebody who is going around killing people has what we would call mental health issues. They're tweaked, but they're tweaked many times because of their actions and their attitudes, and it's a consequence of the lifestyle that they've chosen. And so we throw drugs at that. We do all kinds of things in that kind of situation. And we just have this whole culture that is a blame-shifting culture. It's not really my fault that I do awful things to you. It's, society's fault. It's, I have a mental health issue. I have this, I have that. It's my mommy's fault, all of those kinds of things. When in reality, it is my fault. And maybe I've had a bad life, had bad things done to me, but that should make me less likely to do it to somebody else, not more likely. And so, again, I think that our culture excuses sin way too often. We've got lots of people who could care less about victims and are constantly trying to excuse the sin of the perpetrators, and God hates that. So,
we live in a time where mental health counselors, secular counselors, psychology, it's everywhere. It's on the commercials. You can go online and find it. They're in our community, everywhere. And yet we are the most depressed, the most anxious, the most suicidal of any other time in human history.
Right.
And so, in a nutshell, I explain it like this. When you're dealing with psychology, they don't have a remedy for sin.
Right. That's
so
the
they're
problem.
dealing with the issues of how do you fix the mind.
Right.
But if the issue is spiritual, and you don't believe in spiritual things, then you're at a loss from the get-go, and you're never going to fix the problem because you don't even think that it exists.
Exactly.
And so if you have no tools for redemption, forgiveness, then you're going to be using the mind, and that's going to have a tweaked version of reality, which is it's not your fault. You have a gene of alcoholism.
Yeah.
Take a pill.
Right.
And it's not, people get mad, but there are certain things in their literature and stuff that is true. Mm-hmm. But if your worldview is there is no God,
right,
but you're made in the image of God, what in the world do you have to tell me that's going to fix me?
Yeah, exactly. And that's really the problem with a lot of psychology. And I'm not somebody that just dismisses everything that you have in psychology, because there are studies. It's like you can study human behavior.
Sure.
And so you can see how people deal with grief, and you can see how people deal with guilt, and you can see how people deal with, there's all these, defense mechanisms and things like that. Those are useful. But when you're talking about, like you were saying, when you're talking about the causes, you have these different schools of psychology that think that it's environmental, or that it's societal, or whatever. They come up with some cause that
if you're Freudian, it's all your sexual history.
Yeah, exactly. And so they have all these things that they're trying to lay the blame at that have nothing to do with sin. And the Bible's really clear on the fact that this is it's a result of sin. And one of the cool things about that, people look at that and they go, well, that's so condemning. Well, when you're talking about mental illness, and mental illness being something that you're trying to treat, the way that society has gone at this is, I've got this mental illness, and if you can't fix it, I'm going to have it for the rest of my life.
Right.
And so what we do is we medicate it, or do whatever we're going to do. But basically what they do with people is they leave them in that position for the rest of their life. There's no getting over it.
And where's the hope in that?
Yeah, and there is none. And then on the other hand, when you come up and you say, this problem is actually just sin. One of the cool things about sin is sin can be forgiven, and sin can be repented of.
Yep.
Sin can be turned away from. Sin is something that is optional. I don't have to do it, and I can be freed from it. And that is what psychology is missing. And, there are some schools of psychology that are starting to go towards responsibility. Mm-hmm. And so that's always encouraging.
Yeah, I actually like the guys and the things that they say.
Yeah.
You got it. Going back to the first question, you still got to have wisdom,
right?
Christians. But there's definitely fruit in,
yeah.
Even like I won't mention his name because I don't want to send people astray. But to your point.
Yep. So,
all right.
There you go.
We are out of time. So thank you guys for joining us. Hopefully you're blessed today. Appreciate your questions. Good ones today. If you have them in the future, send them to crosswalkradio@gmail.com. You guys can text or voicemail 707-872-7677. Again, this is a Q&A show that we do every Wednesday at 3:30. Also, check out our podcast. We release a new episode every other Friday, and it's our True Set Free Uncut Unpacking Theology, totally separate platform. Go and check that out. And if you could like, subscribe, share, we would super appreciate it. So, God bless you guys. Have a great week. We'll see you